The restaurant was one of those places where every detail seemed perfect. The lights were soft, giving a warm glow to polished tables, and the scent of fresh flowers mixed with the subtle aroma of expensive dishes. It was the kind of place where wealthy people came to see and be seen. For the staff, it could be both a dream and a nightmare. Every movement, every smile, every small mistake mattered. She had been working there for a few months now. Not long enough to feel fully comfortable, but long enough to know the rules. She moved quietly between the tables, balancing plates and pouring drinks, always careful not to spill anything. She had learned to disappear in the background. No one noticed her much, and she liked it that way. She wasn't someone who had grown up around wealth. Her life had been simple, full of small struggles that made her stronger in ways people rarely saw. She had a quiet dignity, the kind that didn't demand attention, but you could sense it if you looked closely. Most of the guests didn't notice, and she liked it that way. It allowed her to watch, to listen, to understand people without them understanding her. That evening, the restaurant was unusually busy. The clinking of glasses and soft murmurs of conversation filled the air. She moved from table to table, refilling water, taking orders, and making sure everyone had what they needed. It was exhausting, but she didn't complain. She had learned long ago that patience was a kind of armor, and kindness was invisible strength. Then he arrived. The moment the millionaire stepped into the restaurant, the atmosphere seemed to change. He wasn't just any customer. He was tall, perfectly dressed, and radiated wealth in a way that demanded attention. But it wasn't just wealth, it was the kind of confidence that often came with arrogance. He had a sharp voice, a sharp smile, and sharp eyes that seemed to look at everyone as if they were beneath him. He was not alone. A few friends accompanied him, equally wealthy, equally loud. They laughed at jokes that were more about showing off than being funny. The staff quickly took their orders, moving efficiently, trying to keep up with their demands. When he saw her, the waitress who had been quietly moving around all evening, a small smirk crossed his face. He had that look like he was already planning how to make her feel small, even before she spoke. She noticed it immediately, but she didn't flinch. She had learned that confidence could be quiet, and fear could be loud. He started with a small comment, one that seemed casual but was meant to humiliate. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" he asked, looking around the restaurant as if expecting everyone to laugh at the thought. The words were polite enough on the surface, but the tone carried a clear message. He thought she was beneath him. She smiled politely, her hands steady despite the tiny flicker of irritation in her chest. She had learned long ago that arguing rarely worked, especially with people like him. They didn't listen to reason, they listened to power. She answered softly, almost too quiet to hear, "Yes, sir. Everything is under control." The millionaire didn't stop. He made small jokes, comments that drew the attention of other diners. He asked if she had been trained properly, if she knew how to serve real people, and even suggested that someone more experienced might do a better job. Some people in the restaurant giggled politely, unsure if they should laugh or feel embarrassed for her. She ignored them all. She had faced ridicule before, though never quite like this. Her life hadn't given her the luxury of letting people's opinions shake her. She focused on her tasks, pouring water, folding napkins, moving quickly but gracefully. There was a rhythm to her movements, a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, but then he saw the piano in the corner. It wasn't unusual for a restaurant like this to have live music occasionally. Tonight it was silent, but the piano sat there like a challenge. He leaned slightly toward her, his smirk widening. "Do you play?" he asked, clearly expecting her to say no. "Or are you just good at carrying plates?" The words were sharp, but there was something else in them too, a test, though he didn't realize it. Most people would have hesitated, embarrassed. Most people would have lowered their eyes or shrugged nervously. She paused. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew this moment mattered. She had spent years learning, practicing, hiding her talent. The piano had always been her secret, the one place where she could express everything she felt. And now, it seemed, the universe had given her a choice. Her hands hovered briefly in the air, almost as if she were measuring the weight of the moment. Then, quietly, she said, "Yes, I play." The millionaire laughed, a sharp, cruel laugh that drew attention. "Really?" he said. "Why don't you show us then? Let's see if the waitress can really do anything besides serve drinks." His friends chuckled, eager to see what they assumed would be a disaster. For a second, the restaurant was silent. People turned to look, curious and a little uncomfortable. She could feel the eyes on her, but she didn't look at them. She looked at the piano, sitting there like a silent companion, waiting. She walked toward it, each step measured, steady, confident in a way that surprised even herself. As she approached the bench, she could hear the whispers behind her. "She's going to fail. Why would she even try? This is going to be embarrassing." But she didn't let their words touch her. She sat down, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. For a moment she closed her eyes, letting the world fade away. The millionaire's smirk seemed bigger somehow, as if he already believed he had won. But she didn't care. She had learned that the real power wasn't in showing off, it was in quiet confidence, in the kind of talent that couldn't be faked. Her first touch on the keys was gentle. A soft note filled the air, delicate but precise. It was almost like a question, testing the space around her. And then, slowly, the notes began to flow. Even as she played, she could feel the room holding its breath. The millionaire, still smirking at first, began to frown, confused. The music was not what he expected. It was simple, yes, but there was depth in it. Emotion that spoke louder than words ever could. At that moment, she realized something important. She didn't need to prove anything to him. She didn't need his approval. The music itself was enough. The piano was her voice, and tonight it would speak louder than any insult or joke ever could. She played on, each note carrying a piece of her story, her struggles, her quiet victories, her patience, and her strength. And though she didn't look at anyone, she could sense a change in the room. People were no longer whispering. They were listening, truly listening, as if the music had stopped time itself. The millionaire, once so confident and mocking, shifted in his seat. His smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He had thought this would be a simple joke, a way to show everyone how unimportant she was. But he was wrong, and she knew it. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress with speed or complexity. She let the music flow naturally, letting the emotion guide her fingers. Each note seemed to echo through the room, touching something in everyone who listened. She had found her stage, even if no one had given it to her. By the time she finished the first short piece, the restaurant was silent. Not the polite, uncomfortable silence of waiting for something to happen, but kind of silence that meant everyone was stunned. That everyone had been reminded that talent and heart couldn't be measured by appearance or position. She sat back for a moment, breathing lightly, her hands still resting on the keys. She looked at the millionaire, who was now completely silent, unsure of what to say or do. And she realized something else. Sometimes the quietest people carried the loudest strength. It had only just begun. The room was still buzzing quietly after the first notes had faded. People weren't talking yet. They were processing what they had just heard. Some looked shocked, some impressed, and some couldn't believe what they had witnessed. The soft music had left an unexpected mark, and the waitress had already begun to command the attention she had never been given before. But the millionaire didn't like surprises that didn't favor him. He had walked in expecting to feel powerful, to see someone small and ordinary stumble and embarrass herself. Now he felt a flicker of doubt. His friends, equally confident in their status, were exchanging uneasy glances. The laughter and jokes that had filled the table moments ago had disappeared. Replaced by an awkward silence, he leaned slightly forward, resting his elbow on the table, and studied her. His eyes narrowed, searching for a weakness, something to prove that she was just a waitress and nothing more. "Well," he said finally, his voice dripping with false politeness, "that was interesting. But can you really play something more challenging, something impressive? Or was that just beginner's luck?" There it was, the challenge, thinly veiled as curiosity. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, feeling the cool surface and remembering the years of practice she had poured into this very instrument. She had been playing the piano long before she had ever stepped into a restaurant like this. Every note she had learned, every scale she had repeated hundreds of times, had led to this moment. The millionaire smirked, thinking he had shaken her. "Don't be shy," he added, leaning back, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Show us something real. Or are you only good at that little tune?" A small murmur ran through the diners. Some were curious. Others were amused by what they assumed would be her embarrassment. The room was waiting for a mistake, a misstep, a stumble, but the waitress didn't rush. She took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle around her. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone. Instead, she closed her eyes for a fraction of a second and let herself feel the music already inside her mind. Her fingers lifted and then fell onto the keys with purpose. A gentle melody began to fill the space, soft at first, almost hesitant. But it wasn't weak, it was thoughtful. Every note carried emotion, a story the room had not expected to hear. The millionaire's smirk began to fade, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. This wasn't just simple playing. This was skill, depth, and control. He had expected failure, and instead he was witnessing something remarkable. His friends, initially giggling and whispering among themselves, were now quiet, their expressions shifting from amusement to surprise. She played on, her hands moving smoothly over the keys, each note deliberate and full of feeling. There was a confidence in her playing now, a calm that contrasted sharply with the tension in the millionaire's face. The more she played, the more the room seemed to lean in, unconsciously drawn to the sound. Even the waitstaff stopped briefly in their movements. Listening to the unexpected music, the millionaire tried to regain control of the situation. He leaned toward her again, his voice louder this time. "That's nice, but can you play something complicated? Something that really shows skill?" She didn't respond verbally. Instead, her fingers danced over the keys with increasing complexity. The music grew richer, flowing faster, each chord carefully placed. It wasn't just technical skill, it was artistry. Every person in the room could feel the emotion behind it. Some were moved quietly, their eyes widening. Others whispered to each other in disbelief. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had thought this would be a simple joke, a way to make her look foolish. But she was not only keeping up, she was shining. Every note she played reminded him that talent couldn't be measured by appearance or job title. She was humble, quiet, but her ability spoke volumes. She noticed a few skeptical diners who had come in with assumptions about her. She didn't look to them for validation, but she played as if telling them a story. The piano spoke of her years of hidden effort, the discipline that few ever noticed, and the patience that life had taught her. The millionaire's friends began to look at him strangely. The confidence that had been so easy before now seemed to falter. He cleared his throat, trying to regain authority. "Impressive," he said slowly, "but let's see if you can maintain that. Can you finish with something that really wows us?" His tone was sharper now, almost a challenge. She took a breath, feeling the music inside her rise to the surface. She began a final piece, the one she had been saving for moments like this. Her hands moved with a combination of grace and precision, flowing naturally over the keys. The melody carried energy and emotion, powerful yet controlled. It wasn't just notes, it was a story, one she had lived silently, now told without words. As the music filled the room, the millionaire could no longer hide his unease. He leaned back, trying to look relaxed, but his eyes betrayed him. This was no longer about showing power, it was about witnessing someone who had quietly mastered a talent he had never imagined. The other diners were captivated, some even holding their breath. Caught in the spell of her playing, the waitress didn't rush to finish. Each note had meaning, each pause deliberate. It wasn't a performance for applause. It was a declaration of skill, resilience, and quiet dignity. She had faced ridicule before, and now she faced it again, but this time, she had control. Slowly, the music reached its peak. The melody swelled, carrying with it emotion that was almost tangible. The room was silent, save for the piano, which seemed to speak louder than words ever could. Even the staff, trained to stay calm under pressure, were watching in awe. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty. Finally, she ended with a soft chord, letting it linger in the air. The silence that followed was heavy, different from before. It was not the silence of waiting or awkwardness, it was silence filled with respect. People were breathing, leaning back in their chairs, some wiping tears they hadn't expected to shed. The millionaire sat frozen, his arrogance replaced by shock. He had thought he controlled the moment, that he could humiliate a young waitress and entertain his friends. Instead, he had witnessed something extraordinary. He could no longer find words, no longer find a way to dominate the scene. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that wealth and confidence did not always equal skill or respect. The waitress sat quietly, her hands resting on the keys. She didn't gloat, she didn't smile triumphantly. Her calmness, her humility, and her talent had already spoken for themselves. She had turned a moment that could have been shame into one of quiet victory. People began to clap. Slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Some stood, moved by the raw emotion and unexpected talent. The millionaire's friends clapped too, though more hesitantly, realizing that they had underestimated her. The millionaire himself remained silent, his expression unreadable, yet she could sense the shift. Something had changed, not just in him, but in the room. The waitress rose from the bench and returned to her work. Her face remained calm, her posture unchanged, but inside there was a sense of satisfaction. She had faced humiliation, turned it into opportunity, and reminded everyone, including the wealthiest and most arrogant in the room, that true talent is not measured by status or title, and though the music had ended, the memory of it lingered. People would talk about this evening for a long time, about the young waitress who had faced the millionaire's scorn and responded not with anger but with brilliance. She had not only played the piano, she had played her story, her resilience, and her courage, and for that, she would always be remembered. That night, she walked back to the kitchen with quiet pride. She didn't need recognition, and she didn't need approval. What mattered was that she had stayed true to herself, and in doing so, had quietly commanded respect that no one could take away. The room had returned to its normal rhythm after the first wave of astonishment. Diners had resumed their quiet conversations, but the energy was different now. Everyone knew something remarkable had just happened, and the air was thick with curiosity and a little tension. The staff exchanged glances, unsure if the moment was truly over or if it was just the calm before something even bigger. The waitress returned to her duties, moving gracefully, pouring water, clearing plates, and attending to the other tables. Her calm exterior hid the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She could still feel the electricity in the room from the piano, the way the notes had connected her to everyone present. For a moment she paused behind a column, taking a deep breath. She wasn't done. She could feel that she hadn't yet shared everything she had to give. The millionaire, however, was not ready to let go of control. He was used to being the center of attention, used to having people react the way he expected. Seeing a young waitress take command of the room through music had unsettled him more than he would admit. He leaned toward his friends, lowering his voice, but still loud enough for her to hear. That was just luck. Anyone can play a few notes. Let's see if she can actually do something impressive. The words, meant to challenge and demean, reached her ears, but instead of discouraging her, they fueled her resolve. She had worked years in silence, hidden behind walls of practice and patience. Now was the moment to show that her talent was not a fluke, not luck. It was the result of dedication, emotion, and persistence. She approached the piano again, this time with a quiet certainty that caught some in the restaurant by surprise. People whispered among themselves, "Is she really going to do it again? I didn't expect her to come back. This is going to be interesting." Some were curious, some skeptical, but all eyes were on her now. She sat down and adjusted her posture. Her fingers hovered just above the keys, almost as if she were listening to a melody in her mind before letting it out. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence alone demanded attention. The millionaire smirked, leaning back in his chair, confident that he would see her falter. His friends were watching closely, some still doubtful, some beginning to feel the uncertainty he must have felt himself. This was supposed to be their entertainment, the fall of someone they considered beneath them. But they were starting to realize that this was no ordinary situation. She began with a soft, slow chord, one that drew the room in immediately. Unlike before, this piece was more complex, layered, and emotional. Each note carried meaning, each pause deliberate. She wasn't playing to impress technically, she was telling a story through her music. And the story was gripping. The diners fell silent again. This time not out of shock, but because the music demanded their attention. The melody swelled gently, filling the room with emotion that was both tender and powerful. Her fingers moved confidently across the keys, blending softness with strength. The complexity of the music made it clear that this was no casual skill, this was mastery. The millionaire's initial smirk had vanished. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to maintain composure. But as the music continued, his confidence eroded. He realized that what he had expected to be a simple, humiliating moment for the waitress had turned into an experience that humbled him instead. He had underestimated her completely. Her playing wasn't just about skill. It was about resilience, about a quiet strength built over years of dedication. Each note seemed to carry fragments of her life, her struggles, her hopes, her dreams, and the obstacles she had overcome. People began to feel the story in their own hearts. Some leaned forward in their chairs, captivated. Others held their hands to their mouths as if the music had left them breathless. The staff behind her paused, watching in awe. They had seen her work silently, efficiently, day after day, never asking for praise or recognition. But they hadn't known she carried this kind of talent, this kind of power. It was almost as if the piano had become a window into a side of her they had never seen before. The millionaire attempted to intervene again, speaking a little louder. "Don't get too comfortable. It's just a song. Let's see if you can really hold their attention with something more impressive." His tone was sharp, almost challenging, but the effect he hoped for didn't come. She ignored him, letting the music speak for itself. As she played, the piece grew in intensity. The rhythm became faster, more intricate, but her control never wavered. Every chord, every scale, every subtle shift in tempo was precise and intentional. She was no longer playing for herself alone, she was commanding the room, and everyone could feel it. People who had come to the restaurant expecting a quiet dinner were now part of something extraordinary. Diners whispered to each other, sharing disbelief and admiration. Some who had mocked or doubted her earlier now exchanged glances of respect. The power in the room had shifted completely. The millionaire's friends were also changing. The confidence they had entered with was replaced by quiet unease. They were realizing that they were witnessing talent that they could not control or belittle. He had underestimated the waitress's strength, and now it was impossible to ignore. The waitress's expression remained calm, her face serene, but her heart was pounding with quiet satisfaction. She could feel the effect of her playing on the people around her. She could sense the shift in the millionaire's demeanor, the change in his energy. For the first time, he was no longer in command of the room. He was a spectator, forced to witness a young woman's brilliance. Her music became a bridge between her world and everyone else's, connecting people in the room without a single word. Each note revealed her history, her patience, and the countless hours she had devoted to mastering her art. It was impossible not to notice the care, thought, and emotion in every sound. The piece she played now was different from the earlier one. It wasn't just an emotional melody, it was a full story in sound. It had moments of tension and release, of quiet reflection and powerful crescendos. It was a narrative that only she could tell, and everyone in the room was drawn into it. Even the millionaire, who had come with a plan to humiliate her, could not help but feel the impact. His pride, so carefully maintained, was now shaken. He had walked in expecting dominance, expecting to see someone fail, and instead, he saw someone excel in a way he could not anticipate. It was humbling, and he couldn't find a way to respond. Some diners began to clap softly, moved by the unexpected performance. Others sat frozen, their eyes wide, hearts racing with the emotion the music evoked. It was no longer just a waitress playing the piano, it was a statement, a revelation, and a moment that would stay with everyone present long after the night ended. The waitress continued, her fingers moving over the keys with confidence and grace. She did not rush. She did not force the music. Every note was deliberate, every pause intentional. She was in control, and the room had surrendered to her command. As the final chords approached, the intensity of the music built to a gentle but powerful climax. It was not loud or aggressive, it was controlled, precise, and deeply moving. Each note seemed to echo in the hearts of everyone listening, leaving a mark that words could not describe. The last note lingered in the air, soft and fading, and then silence returned. But this silence was different. It was filled with awe, respect, and admiration. People were breathing, leaning back in their chairs, some with tears they hadn't expected to shed. The waitress's performance had transformed the room completely. The millionaire sat still, unable to respond. His friends were equally quiet, trying to process what they had witnessed. The smirk he had carried in moments before was gone. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that not all power comes from wealth, status, or arrogance. Talent, dedication, and heart could outweigh all of that, and the waitress had proven it tonight. She rose from the bench quietly, her posture calm, her face serene. She didn't look for praise, didn't seek approval. The room had already given her what she needed, acknowledgement of her skill and respect for her strength. She had faced ridicule and turned it into triumph, using only her talent and quiet determination. As she returned to her duties, the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted completely. People who had doubted her now watched with admiration. The staff exchanged looks of quiet pride, witnessing something they would not forget. And even the millionaire, once so confident in his ability to control the situation, could not deny the truth he had just seen. The evening continued, but the magic of those moments lingered. The music had done more than entertain, it had reminded everyone that appearances could be deceiving, that humility and strength often lived together, and that quiet people sometimes carried the loudest power. The waitress moved through the restaurant, serving tables, taking orders, and doing her job with the same care and attention as always. But now something had changed. She had proven something to herself and to everyone else, that talent, patience, and courage could command respect even in the face of arrogance, and though the night was far from over, she knew that she had already won something far more important than applause. She had reclaimed her dignity, her confidence, and her quiet authority. The restaurant had settled into a quiet buzz after her last performance, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Where there had been polite chatter and small talk, now there was an air of anticipation, as if everyone present was waiting for something extraordinary to happen. The waitress had returned to her duties, moving calmly and efficiently, but her mind was still on the piano. She knew this was her moment to show the full depth of her talent, the part she had kept hidden from the world. The millionaire, meanwhile, was growing uneasy. His confidence had been shaken, and the playful smirk he had carried when he entered was gone. He had expected entertainment at someone else's expense, but what he had witnessed instead was mastery, humility, and quiet strength. He shifted in his seat, trying to regain composure, but he could feel the eyes of the entire restaurant on him and on her. She walked back toward the piano, each step measured, deliberate. The whispers around her grew softer, less mocking and more curious. People leaned forward slightly in their chairs, sensing that something remarkable was about to unfold. The staff paused in their movements, unable to look away, and even the other diners, who had initially been there for a quiet dinner, were now fully attentive. The waitress sat down at the bench and rested her fingers lightly on the keys. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, the energy of the room and the history of her own life guiding her hands. Her eyes were calm, but inside her heart was steady and strong. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The piano would speak for her. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but full of intention. They floated through the restaurant, capturing attention immediately. The millionaire leaned slightly forward, frowning, sensing that this was not going to be easy to dismiss. Her music was no longer just a melody, it was a story, a voice, a presence that filled the room completely. The piece she played now was unlike anything she had shown before. It was powerful, intricate, and emotional. Each chord carried a message, each note a fragment of her life's journey, struggle, patience, hope, and resilience. She had spent years learning, practicing, and perfecting her skill, often in solitude, and now she was letting it shine for the world to see. The diners were mesmerized. Some sat in stunned silence, unable to move or speak. Others whispered to each other in awe, realizing that this was far beyond a simple performance. The music had transformed the room. Every person present felt it in their own way, whether it was a memory, a feeling, or a quiet recognition of the strength behind the notes. The millionaire's confidence had all but vanished. He tried to hide it, leaning back in his chair, but the truth was visible in his eyes. He had thought he could embarrass a young waitress, make her fail, and entertain his friends. Instead, he was witnessing something extraordinary, something that reminded him that talent and heart could not be measured by status, wealth, or arrogance. Her hands moved gracefully over the keys, blending softness with power. The melody rose and fell like a wave, drawing everyone in. The complexity of the piece was undeniable: fast passages, delicate runs, and deep, resonant chords that seemed to echo in the very walls of the restaurant. She was not just playing. She was commanding, guiding, and telling a story without words. Even the staff, who had seen her work quietly for months, were stunned. They had known her as diligent and patient, but they had never witnessed the full extent of her talent. It was as if the piano had unlocked a part of her soul that had been waiting for this exact moment. The millionaire's friends began to exchange uneasy glances. They had come expecting to see someone humbled, but now they were forced to watch, to feel the power of her performance, and to recognize her brilliance. The laughter and casual chatter that had filled their table earlier were gone, replaced by quiet amazement and disbelief. She noticed, without looking, the change in energy around her. She didn't let it distract her. Instead, it fueled her resolve. Every note she played was precise and full of intention, flowing naturally as if the piano itself were an extension of her own voice. She was no longer just playing for herself. She was showing everyone what true talent and determination could accomplish. The room was captivated. People leaned forward, eyes wide, unable to look away. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the beauty and depth of her performance. Others whispered quietly to each other, recognizing the rare gift they were witnessing. The energy in the room had shifted completely. It was no longer a restaurant, but a place where something magical was happening, a moment that would be remembered long after it ended. The millionaire tried once more to assert control. He cleared his throat, speaking loudly enough for her to hear. "This is good, but let's see if you can finish strong. Don't slow down now." His tone carried challenge, arrogance, and expectation, but it had lost its power. She didn't respond verbally. Her music was her answer. The final section of the piece was powerful and moving. She blended speed, precision, and emotion in a way that drew the listeners into the story she was telling. Every chord resonated with meaning, and every pause felt intentional, as if the space itself were holding its breath. The room was completely silent, captivated by the skill, emotion, and quiet authority she projected through her music. As the final notes approached, she slowed, allowing each sound to linger, to echo, and to settle in the hearts of those listening. The last chord faded gently, leaving a silence that was heavier than any applause could have been. People were breathing slowly, processing the extraordinary performance they had just witnessed. The silence was filled with awe, respect, and admiration. Then slowly the room erupted in applause. It started softly, hesitant, then grew louder as people stood, moved by the beauty and mastery of her playing. Some diners clapped enthusiastically, others whispered congratulations to the staff, and some wiped tears from their eyes. Unable to contain their emotions, the millionaire sat frozen, unable to respond immediately. His arrogance had been replaced by a quiet, stunned recognition. He had thought he controlled the situation, but he had been completely wrong. He had underestimated her talent, her strength, and her ability to rise above humiliation. For the first time, he understood that wealth and status could not dictate respect or mastery. The waitress remained seated for a moment, letting the applause wash over the room. She didn't smile triumphantly or seek attention. Her calm demeanor, her humility, and her quiet confidence had already spoken for themselves. She had turned what could have been a moment of embarrassment into a moment of undeniable triumph. As she rose from the piano bench and returned to her duties, the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed completely. People looked at her differently now, with respect, admiration, and quiet awe. The staff exchanged proud glances, and even the diners who had doubted her were now silent. Humbled by what they had just experienced, the millionaire remained seated, finally finding his voice, though quieter than before. He could not hide the shift in his perception. He had come expecting to dominate and ridicule, but he had been forced to witness talent and resilience in its purest form. He had been humbled, and he could not argue with what he had just seen. The waitress moved through the restaurant, serving tables, taking orders, and maintaining her calm professionalism. But inside, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had faced humiliation, turned it into opportunity, and shown everyone that true strength came from skill, patience, and heart. She had transformed a moment meant to shame her into one that would be remembered for a long time. Her music had done more than entertain. It had reminded everyone that appearances could be deceiving, that quiet people often carried incredible strength, and that talent and perseverance could command respect far beyond words. She had claimed her dignity, her confidence, and her quiet authority, and no one in the room could take that away. The night continued, but the impact of her performance lingered. People would talk about it for weeks, about the young waitress who had turned a millionaire's mockery into an unforgettable display of brilliance. She had shown that courage, talent, and humility could overcome arrogance and prejudice, leaving a mark on everyone who had witnessed it. Even as she returned to ordinary tasks, she carried with her a sense of quiet triumph. She had proven something important, not just to the people in the restaurant, but to herself. She had shown that true power is not always visible, that patience and dedication matter more than appearances, and that even in the face of scorn, one can rise above with grace and talent. And as she moved through the restaurant, serving plates, pouring drinks, and doing her job with care, she knew something had shifted forever. The respect she had earned was not loud or flashy, but it was real. The power of her music, her talent, and her courage had transformed the night, and no one would forget it. The restaurant was alive with a different energy now. The hum of conversation was no longer casual or distracted. It was filled with admiration, awe, and a kind of quiet respect that lingered long after the music had stopped. The diners who had come expecting a simple evening of fine food and polite entertainment had witnessed something extraordinary. They couldn't stop talking about it in low tones, sharing their surprise and their appreciation for the young waitress, who had transformed the night into a memory they would never forget. She moved through the tables, carrying plates and pouring water as though nothing had happened. Her steps were calm, deliberate, and professional. She didn't smile proudly or boast about what she had done. That wasn't her way. But beneath her composed exterior, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had turned a moment of potential humiliation into a demonstration of her true strength. She had shown everyone, including the millionaire, that talent and heart mattered more than arrogance or wealth. The millionaire sat quietly at his table, staring at the empty space where she had just performed. His confidence had been shaken completely, replaced by a newfound awareness. He had walked in expecting to belittle a young waitress, to entertain himself and his friends at her expense. Instead, he had been humbled. The power he had relied on, his money, his status, his confidence meant nothing in the face of genuine skill and courage. His friends were similarly silent, exchanging uneasy glances. They had come to witness a joke, but instead they had witnessed excellence, and it made them reconsider what they had assumed about people they had underestimated. They had been reminded that appearances were often deceiving, and that talent and character could emerge from the most unexpected places. As the waitress continued her duties, the diner's attention returned to her not as a server, not as someone invisible, but as someone remarkable. People who had previously ignored her now offered small smiles, quiet nods of appreciation, or whispered words of encouragement. She noticed it, but she didn't change her behavior. She didn't need to. Respect she knew could not be demanded, it had to be earned. And tonight she had earned it completely. At one table, a few of the regular patrons leaned toward each other in quiet conversation. "Did you see that?" one whispered. "She played like a professional. That wasn't just talent, it was something more." Another nodded, clearly moved. "I've never seen anyone control a room like that with just music. Incredible." The staff behind the scenes were just as affected. They had seen her work tirelessly, day after day, and they knew her dedication. But what they had just witnessed was beyond anything they could have imagined. They exchanged proud looks, realizing that someone they had always respected for her diligence also possessed extraordinary talent. Some of them felt inspired, some even slightly emotional, realizing the hidden depths that a person could carry quietly. The millionaire finally found his voice. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain a sense of authority, but it was weaker than before. You are very talented," he said slowly, carefully choosing his words. It wasn't mockery, it wasn't arrogance, it was recognition. For him, this was a hard moment of humility. He had expected to dominate, to control the room, and instead, he had been reminded that talent and dedication could not be bought or forced. The waitress paused briefly, acknowledging his words with a quiet nod. She didn't need to say much. Her performance had already spoken volumes. She had shown that skill and courage could rise above ridicule, and that even the most confident, arrogant person could be humbled by genuine talent. The restaurant's energy began to shift fully into celebration, not just of her music, but of her courage and composure. Diners who had been skeptical at first now offered quiet applause, smiles, and nods of admiration. Some even approached her with heartfelt compliments, saying things like, "I've never seen anything like that," or "Thank you for sharing your talent with us, it was incredible." She accepted the compliments graciously, maintaining her calm demeanor. She didn't need to be the center of attention. She had already proven to herself that she was capable of rising above fear, ridicule, and expectation. Her satisfaction came from the knowledge that she had stayed true to herself, and that her courage had been witnessed and felt by everyone present. The millionaire watched quietly as the scene unfolded. He had thought he controlled the situation, thought he could humiliate her for amusement. Instead, he had been forced to acknowledge her strength, her talent, and her dignity. His friends began to nod subtly as if to themselves, silently admitting that they had misjudged her. Even he, who had rarely been humbled, felt a deep sense of respect for her. The waitress moved back toward the kitchen, carrying a tray carefully, her posture calm. She had faced the challenge, she had overcome it, and she had done so without arrogance or need for recognition. That was the power of her performance. It was quiet yet undeniable. It didn't scream for attention, it earned it naturally, simply because it was genuine. As she returned to the kitchen, the restaurant manager approached her quietly. "That was incredible," he said, almost whispering. "You've never done anything like that before in front of the guests. Everyone is talking about it. You've changed how they see you and how they see talent." She smiled softly, grateful for the acknowledgement, but she didn't linger on it. She returned to her work, letting her calm professionalism speak for itself. Meanwhile, the diners continued to discuss what they had witnessed. "I've never seen anything like that," one said quietly. And the way she handled herself. It wasn't just music. It was confidence, courage, and grace. Another nodded in agreement. "It's amazing how someone so quiet can have so much strength. I'll remember this night for a long time." Even the children in the restaurant, who had been fidgety and distracted before, were quiet now, mesmerized by what they had seen and felt. The waitress's performance had reached everyone, across ages and expectations. It was a reminder that talent and character could shine even in the most unexpected people, and that humility could coexist with brilliance. The millionaire finally stood, his expression thoughtful. He approached the waitress cautiously, no longer with arrogance but with respect. "I misjudged you," he said sincerely. "I expected to see someone embarrassed, but instead I've seen something remarkable. Thank you for showing all of us that talent isn't always obvious and that it can't be measured by status." She nodded politely, accepting his words with grace. She didn't need to boast or celebrate. Her performance had done all of that for her. She had faced ridicule, turned it into triumph, and earned respect from everyone present, including someone who had thought he could dominate her as the evening continued. The restaurant seemed to hum with a new energy. Guests lingered, discussing the performance and expressing admiration. The staff worked with renewed pride, proud to be part of a place where such talent had been revealed. And the waitress, quietly moving between tables, felt a sense of inner peace. She had faced a challenge, risen above it, and reminded everyone that true strength and talent often live in the quietest people. Later, after the restaurant had calmed down and the last guests had left, she sat quietly in the empty dining room for a moment. She reflected on the night, the fear, the anticipation, the challenge, and the triumph. She realized that this was more than just a performance. It was a reminder to herself that her talent mattered, that her courage mattered, and that no amount of ridicule could diminish what she carried within her, even the millionaire. As he left, carried a different perspective. He had come to the restaurant expecting to control, to belittle, and to dominate. Instead, he had learned a lesson in humility, respect, and recognition of true skill. He had seen firsthand that talent and courage cannot be forced, cannot be bought, and cannot be ignored. The waitress cleaned the piano gently, her movements calm and deliberate. She didn't rush, and she didn't need to. The memory of her performance, the emotions she had shared, and the respect she had earned were all she needed. She had faced a challenge, met it with grace and talent, and emerged stronger, not just in skill, but in confidence and self-respect. The night ended with the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment. Guests had left, the staff had completed their duties, and the restaurant was returning to its ordinary rhythm. But the memory of the young waitress who had turned ridicule into brilliance lingered. It would be a story told again and again, a story of courage, skill, and the quiet strength that can rise above even the most arrogant challenges. She walked home that night with a quiet pride. She hadn't needed recognition or applause to feel her worth. She had faced fear, judgment, and mockery, and she had prevailed. Her talent had been seen, her courage had been felt, and her dignity had been preserved. In that moment, she knew that true strength doesn't always announce itself. It simply rises quietly and leaves a mark that cannot be erased. And so, the story of that night became more than just a performance. It became a lesson for everyone present. Never underestimate someone because of their position, their appearance, or their quiet demeanor. True power comes from talent, patience, courage, and heart, and the young waitress had shown all of that in the most remarkable way imaginable.